innings of quality, baseball, those hitters, they'll do their jobs, and that bullpen can shut people down. They've got one of the best bullpens, I think, in the majors with, Chapman and
I was going to ask that. Didn't they get the brother from Chicago who the closer a couple of years ago last year? Is it Chapman? Yeah, okay. Yeah, I like him a lot.
Yeah, he's
he's ill.
Well, when you're out there throwing 103 miles an hour, I don't know who can hit that. Not me, but
man. Okay. Yeah. In the Central, that's where your team plays at, Cleveland Indians, and you guys are right now in second place, 6 games behind Minnesota. How you feeling about that, Ed? I want to get your thoughts on that one there.
How do I feel about that personally?
Yeah.
I'm crying inside. I don't know what to tell you. I thought that should
be tears of joy the way they're playing and only be 6 games behind.
That is true. What I will say, what I said before the season is that we dumped a lot of talented players before the season started, and I think management in Cleveland at this point would have to say we maybe gave away one too many there. Losing Encarnacion, losing Brantley, even losing bit players like Chisenhall or Jan Gomes. There's only so many of those guys that you can get rid of before your offense starts to suffer a little bit. If you take a look at 396 runs scored, that's kind of towards the bottom of the pack here. Luckily, their pitching has been good enough to kind of carry them through that, despite a lot of problems. You've had Kluber out for a good portion of the year. You've had Clevenger out for a good portion of the year. You have, sadly, Carlos Carrasco now. We just found out that he has leukemia, so that's a thing that they're battling through right now. But guys have stepped up. We see Shane Bieber is an all-star now. Trevor Bauer, he's a battler. He's one of the few guys in the league that, if nothing else, consistently gets you deep into ball games, which is good. And we've got Brad Hand on the all-star team, our closer as well. So got some pieces there. I would like to see Minnesota fade. That would be great for me personally. I don't know if I see that happening necessarily. That's a really good team there. They kind of arrived faster than anybody thought they would, and they sure as hell hit the ball. That's for sure. They're a run scoring team, and I think that's if we're talking about the division as a whole, I think that's kind of a 2-horse race there. I think Cleveland, Minnesota, the rest of the way, the rest of the teams, the White Sox, Royals, and Tigers. No chance.
Yeah.
No chance.
They look pretty done.
They're done.
I'll actually be interested to see how Minnesota does in the second half. They're on pace to set all sorts of home run records with that lineup, and that's a hard thing to do over a course of 162 games, and then in the playoffs after that. So that's actually one race that I'm very interested to watch there with Minnesota and Cleveland. Cleveland's got the experience. I feel like they've kind of been the top dog in that division for a couple of years now. So they've got the guys that are used to, grinding it out in September to try to get to the playoffs. Minnesota's one of these teams that's got a lot of young talent, and then they just hit bombs. I don't know. They hit the ball. So it'd be interesting to see how Minnesota kind of responds to that. I'm not convinced that they can keep that pace up for the second half of the season. So,
okay.
Yeah.
All right, cool. AL West, this is where my boys play right now. Unfortunately, Los Angeles Angels. It ain't looking too good for us. 45-45, sitting at 500. So Houston, obviously, they're a powerhouse in the AL, and looking like they're going to win this division again, unfortunately. But it is what it is. What's been your thoughts on this one here, AL West?
All right. The Angels, I do feel bad. Mike Trout, he's such a good player, and
right.
They're always kind of that 500 team, and they just, hope that they turn it around. I think the biggest surprise here is Texas in this division. I think the Rangers were just kind of considered to be this bottom feeder coming in. So to be in contention, 9 games out seems like a lot right now, but for them at this point, I think that's a really good surprise to be. That's a positive surprise for them, and they're moving in the right direction, I think. I don't know if anybody touches Houston. I kind of touched on it earlier with their rotation that they have. Their lineup is just ridiculous. It's full of all-stars. They're doing it with Springer being out for a while this year. George Springer was out of control for a while, just hitting the ball. Their lineup 1 through 6 is probably mirrors the Yankees lineup 1 through 6, probably the 2 best in baseball, maybe them and the Dodgers. So they kind of have everything. They've got the pitching, they've got the hitting. I don't see Houston really faltering. The team to watch here is Oakland. I think if Oakland can, sneak into that wild card spot, I believe they won the division, or they got a wild card spot last year. Oakland, I'm almost positive. They're a sneaky little team. They got a nice little lineup. They hit the ball well. Their pitching staff's a little, not the best, but I think they're a sneaky team. But Houston, I think, is just they're just the breadwinners in this division.
I can't disagree there. I think they're the most complete team for sure. All facets of the game they do well, even defensively. I think the Angels, if we wanted to talk about them a little bit, they just can't seem to get over the pitching hump. Every year when you've got Mike Trout hitting somewhere in your top 3 in your order, you got a guy like Ohtani there. They've had some decent enough hitting to win games. It just seems like they can't put it together there. I think that's what I said when it came through the first time.
Yeah.
The Angels are just a team that can't seem to put it together, whether it's Garrett Richard injuries, a guy that could have been like an ace on a lot of staffs, but can't seem to hold it together with his injuries. Same thing with Shoemaker. And it's kind of been that way for a long time, going back to Jared Weaver. Really good players that just can't stay healthy. Ohtani, we could talk about him too. It's another pitcher that couldn't quite keep it together. So it's really tough. I think Seattle is a surprise doormat there. Seeing them in last was kind of weird. They were kind of a team that pushed. I don't remember it last year either, whether they made the playoffs or not, but I know they made a push towards the end of the year.
Well, they dumped a lot of guys this year too.
They did.
I think they were kind of expecting that. I think the thing with Seattle was they started off like 13-2 this year or something. Everybody thought, oh my goodness, this team's going to come in and compete, and they just kind of thrown away. The thing with the Angels, I was reading about the Angels. They spent like $110 million on 3 starters, 3 pitchers that came in, and I don't think one of them has an ERA under 7 at this point. and obviously the stuff with Skaggs now too. That could work. A couple different ways. They can kind of take that as some internal motivation, and play kind of their season for him and do well. But that just definitely does not help. He was kind of one of the more consistent fixtures in that rotation, and without him now, it's kind of they're in a rough spot with that pitching staff.
Yeah, rest in peace, Tyler Skaggs, man. That was crazy just hearing about literally that they're in a series with Houston or with Texas, and then next day he passed away. So did y'all hear anything about that? Like what happened?
They nothing official. There's an autopsy. They're suspecting heart attack. Is what they're suspecting. They didn't say foul play or anything like that. So either that, sometimes that aneurysm, I think, is another thing they were looking at. It happened to Darryl Kyle. I don't know if you recognize that name. Probably early 2000s, I would say. He was a pitcher for the St. Louis Cardinals at the time. And it's kind of same scenario. Found him, unconscious in the hotel room, and he had passed. Jeez. So they're thinking of a similar situation to that. So definitely unexpected. Every article I've read about Skaggs, every news outlet I've seen, everything on social media I've seen about him was that he was like a super cool, down to earth guy. Was a funny guy, well liked in the clubhouse. So that's got to be. I can't imagine having to play baseball with that on your mind, and that's really unfortunate.
Yeah, man, that's tough. R.I.P. Tyler Skaggs, man. All right, let's move on to the NL, and we'll start at the top again. NL East. Right now, we have Atlanta leading the way with a 54-37 lead and 7-game lead over the Washington Nationals, who I've been hearing people have been surprised by the Nationals' play. Disappointed, I should say. It's expected to be better than what they are right now. And then you guys, we was talking earlier, same thing with the Philadelphia Phillies, with all the star power that they brought in this offseason, really not living up to the hype. So what's your thoughts on that one?
Well, I think in general, it's interesting because I think there's a lot of teams in this division that are actually underperforming, because I would say a lot of people would say the Mets are underperforming too.
Probably, I would say that's probably the biggest. Looking at these standings, obviously Philadelphia, but I'd say the Mets are probably the most disappointing team in this division. Yeah,
because the Phillies, despite the fact that they're maybe not playing as well as their roster would make you think, they still have a winning record, and they're still right in line for a wild card, which is kind of what a lot of people were thinking. Now, I thought that they had a chance at winning the division, particularly if their pitching held up, but so you could say minorly disappointing, but everyone really said that the Mets were going to be a team that would vie for the division there, with Syndergaard and DeGrom leading the way. You had some good young players who actually have played better than people thought. Like Pete Alonso's there.
I think their younger players are outdoing the veterans they brought in. Syndergaard's actually been pretty poo-poo this year. I don't know if you've been looking at his numbers. I expected him to be kind of like this Cy Young kind of guy, this guy who goes out there and throws 100 every start, and he's been hit hard this year. So
yeah, it's tough. You could talk about Atlanta as a pleasant surprise, but I mean their roster's really good too. Acuna, Albies, you got some guys that can definitely play there. So I'm excited for the race down the wire. It's looking like it's Atlanta's game to lose right now, but I don't know. You got to see how it shakes out. I would say Miami is no surprise. What Jeter's done there. I think I talked about it the last time I was on. I just don't understand the thought process there with that team at all. But we'll see how this one shakes out.
It's interesting that you brought up the Nationals because it's kind of that's where I am geographically.
Yeah.
And huge disappointment. That's really what we've heard all year is how disappointing that they've been. They've actually, as of late, have jumped up in the standings and have come alive. And they're a dangerous team. Just Scherzer, Strasburg, Corbin, those top three. I mean, if Washington can find a way to get into the playoffs, I don't know if they overtake the Braves. But if they can get a wild card, win the wild card, and get into a 5-game series and then a 7-game series, you're talking about one of the more dangerous teams out there with those 3 starting pitchers, because that's all you need. Even in a 7-game series, you could just rotate those 3. You're probably going to get 2 wins automatically out of Scherzer as long as you're scoring 2 runs. I mean, the guy's just a monster.
Right.
And then Strasburg and Corbin, that's tough. They've got a lot of young talent there. They've got probably one of the more underrated players, I think, in the entire league, and Anthony Rendon, the third baseman. Their lineup is it's a very solid lineup. So I think if they can sneak in, they'll be a dangerous team come September. And they're always that team that for the past, I think, 5 or 6 years, they've been tops in that division, and then they've gone to the playoffs and done nothing but disappoint. And that's kind of the story, the way it's been. This is the year for them to do it because I don't know. Rendon's going to be a free agent next year. I don't know what they're going to do with him. Strasburg has a player option. He can go elsewhere, get big money. Scherzer's not getting any younger. They do have a lot of young hitting talent, but they got some big decisions to make in this offseason. So I think it's kind of now or never with this team. But they'd be a dangerous team in this division.
Okay. Real quick, side note, mentioning Miami kind of made me think of this. Did you guys hear about, I think it was Tampa Bay, if I'm not mistaken. They was talking about splitting their season between Tampa Bay and then Montreal, I believe was the other city, or Quebec, or whatever city it was. What do y'all think about that? That'd be kind of interesting. Like, I've never even heard of no shit like that.
Yeah, no, me either. That would be a first time, I think, in professional sports that a team would want to do that. I don't know how there'd be so many moving pieces there. I'd be interested to see how just the logistics of that would work.
Right.
I heard from what they were saying that they would play the latter portion of their games in Montreal and the first half of the season in Tampa Bay. So I don't know the naming rights of the teams.
Yeah.
I don't know how it would work for the lease for the stadiums in the city, because a lot of times when you get these things rolling, the lease on the building dictates what you can do. Like you'd rather have 80 home games in a place than 40 for revenue, right? Just as an owner. So I don't know how they would plan on that working.
They'd be the Montreal Devil Expos?
Yeah, they'd have to be some guys. I don't know what would happen there exactly, and I can't imagine that players would go for that either. I think if that thing hits a roadblock at all, it would be with the MLB Players Association that would file some kind of a grievance, because even if it did make sense for the city, and if it did make sense for the owners of both or of the franchise, and then they could work it out with both cities for leasing purposes and all of that, you'd still have players that their lives would be all busted up, and that kind of gets lost in this, is that you'd be asking players to spend one part of the year in one city and one part in another, not to mention that it's the second city is in Canada. So that's just it seems like a logistical nightmare to say that. It's a whole all the way across the border, all 3 miles from here, in a whole brand new foreign country called Canada.
That's far from Florida, though.
Right.
I mean, it's not like it's I could see if it was like Cleveland or something. Well, not see, but I mean that's a major difference. I don't know how the fans would go for that, especially if I mean you're talking the way that they want to do it. If they want to do the majority of some home games in the beginning of the season in Tampa and then the rest of them in Montreal. I mean, why would you go to a Tampa Bay game if you're, in April, if you're not going to be able to see them later in the season? I think they lose a lot of fan base down in Tampa if they do that. And, is baseball really missed that much in Montreal? I thought the reason they left Montreal was because people just didn't, they didn't care.
Yeah, right, exactly.
What people didn't like was that the outfield measurements were in meters instead of feet. So I don't know. Yeah, I can't imagine a team wanting to be split in both ways. I can't imagine what you do with season tickets.